Commander Zexhai stood on the bridge of his warship, watching the small human vessel approach through the darkness of space. His forearms crossed behind his back as he studied the tiny craft on the main screen. The human ship looked fragile compared to his massive battle cruiser. Its metal hull seemed thin and weak, nothing like the thick armor plating that covered Krillian vessels. Zexhai had fought in 17 wars across the galaxy. His dark blue skin bore deep scars from countless battles. Each mark told a story of victory and survival. The largest scar ran from his left shoulder down to his chest, a reminder of the war on Theta Prime where he had led his forces against an army 3 times larger than his own. The human ship sent a message requesting permission to board. Zexhai found this interesting. Most new species either ran away when they saw his warship or immediately attacked. These humans did neither. They asked politely to come aboard and talk. "Let them dock," Zexhai told his crew. "But keep weapons ready." His second-in-command, Captain Vorth, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Commander, we know nothing about these creatures. They could be dangerous." Zexhai laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Look at their ship, Vorth. It has no heavy weapons, no energy shields. These beings barely know how to travel between stars. What threat could they possibly be?" 20 minutes later, 3 humans walked onto his bridge. Zexhai studied them carefully. They were much smaller than Krillians, standing only about 6 feet tall. Their skin was soft and pale with no natural armor or protective scales. They had only 2 arms and 2 legs, which seemed inefficient for combat. Most surprising of all, they showed no visible scars or battle marks. The human in front stepped forward. He wore a dark blue uniform with small metal decorations on his chest. His hair was brown and cut short. His eyes were steady and calm as he looked up at the towering alien commander. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Harmony," the human said. His voice was clear and confident. "Thank you for allowing us to board your ship." Zexhai bent down slightly to get a better look at this small creature. "I am Commander Zexhai of the Krillian Imperial Fleet. You are far from your homeworld, Captain Morrison. What brings humans to this part of space?" "We are exploring," Morrison replied simply. "Learning about other species and seeking peaceful relationships." The alien commander found this answer puzzling. In his experience, species only traveled far from home for 2 reasons: to find new resources or to make war. This human spoke of exploration and peace, as if they were normal reasons to risk dangerous journeys through space. "And who are your companions?" Zexhai asked, gesturing toward the other 2 humans. "Lieutenant Amy Collins, my second officer," Morrison said, nodding toward a woman with short blonde hair, "and Sergeant Ben Torres, our security chief." Zexhai examined the female human with particular interest. Among Krillians, females were kept safely away from warfare and dangerous missions. They were too valuable to risk in combat. Yet here was a human female standing confidently on a military vessel, apparently holding an important position. "Your species allows females to serve in military roles?" Zexhai asked. "Of course," Morrison answered, seeming surprised by the question. "Lieutenant, Collins is one of our best officers. She has led many successful missions." The blonde woman stepped forward slightly. "We believe that ability matters more than gender, Commander," she said. Her voice was calm and professional. "Both men and women serve together in our military." This concept confused Zexhai. Every advanced species he had encountered kept their females protected and separate from warfare. It seemed wasteful and dangerous to risk them in military operations. The third human, Torres, remained quiet during this exchange. Zexhai noticed that the man's dark eyes constantly moved around the bridge, observing everything. His posture suggested military training, though he appeared relaxed and unthreatening. "Please sit," Zexhai said, gesturing toward a table near the center of the bridge. His crew quickly arranged chairs suitable for the smaller human bodies. "Tell me about your homeworld. Our scouts have observed Earth from a distance, but we know little about your species." Morrison settled into his chair before answering. "Earth is a diverse planet with many different nations and cultures. We have recently achieved the ability to travel between stars, which is why we are here meeting you now. Recently? Sexhi asked. How recently? Within the last 50 years, Collins answered. Before that, we could only dream of visiting other worlds. The alien commander felt his interest growing. 50 years was extremely recent by Galactic HFY standards. Most species required centuries or millennia to develop safe interstellar travel. Yet these humans had managed it quickly and were already exploring distant regions of space. What drove your species to develop space travel so rapidly? Sexhi asked. Torres spoke for the first time. Curiosity mostly, and the desire to ensure our survival by expanding beyond one world. Survival? Sexhi leaned forward. Is your world under threat? Morrison and his officers exchanged glances. Not from external forces, Morrison said carefully. But we learned long ago that putting all our people in one place could be dangerous. We wanted to spread out among the stars. This answer intrigued Sexhi even more. It suggested that humans understood strategic thinking and long-term planning. Many species never learned this lesson until they faced extinction from wars or natural disasters. Your homeworld shows little evidence of major warfare, Sexhi observed. Our sensors detected no large military installations or battle damage when we scanned your planet. How did your species learn about survival and strategic planning without experiencing significant conflict? Again, the three humans looked at each other. Morrison seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Commander, I think there may be some misunderstanding about our history, Morrison said slowly. Earth has experienced considerable conflict. Perhaps your sensors were not able to detect the signs of past wars. Sexhi's 4 eyes narrowed with interest. Past wars? Tell me about these conflicts. Well, we recently concluded what we call World War II, Morrison explained. It ended about 20 years ago. Before that, we had World War I and many smaller conflicts throughout our history. The alien commander felt a chill run through his body. World War II suggested that humans had fought at least 2 planet-wide conflicts. Among Krillians, a single global war was considered a catastrophic event that might destroy an entire civilization. To survive 2 such conflicts and still achieve space travel seemed impossible. How many of your people died in these world wars? Sexhi asked quietly. Morrison's expression grew somber. World War II alone cost over 70 million lives. World War I killed perhaps 20 million more. Sexhi felt his legs weaken. 90 million deaths represented nearly 3% of his entire species, across all their worlds. For a single planet to lose so many people and continue functioning seemed beyond belief. And your civilization survived these losses? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We rebuilt, Collins said simply. We learned from our mistakes and worked to create a better future. The alien commander stared at these 3 small, fragile-looking beings with new eyes. If their words were true, they came from a world that had endured conflicts far worse than anything in Krillian history. Yet they showed no signs of the trauma and weakness such experiences should have caused. I would like to learn more about these wars, Sexhi said carefully. Would you be willing to share your historical records with us? Of course, Morrison replied. We believe that understanding the past helps prevent future conflicts. We would be happy to exchange historical information with your people. As the meeting continued, Sexhi found himself studying these humans with growing fascination. They spoke of devastating wars and massive casualties as if such things were normal parts of their development. Their calm confidence suggested they had learned valuable lessons from their conflicts, lessons that had made them stronger rather than weaker. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Sexhi wondered if he truly understood what made a species strong in battle. The next morning, Commander Sexhi invited the human delegation to join him in his private quarters for a meal. The room was large and decorated with weapons and battle trophies from his many campaigns. Skulls of defeated enemies hung on the walls alongside energy swords and broken armor pieces. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Collins, and Sergeant Torres sat at the metal table, eating the simple food that Krillian ships carried. Sexhi watched them carefully, noting how they remained calm despite being surrounded by symbols of violence and death. These are reminders of my victories, Zexahai said, waving one of his forearms toward the wall displays. Each piece tells a story of battle and conquest. Morrison nodded politely. You have clearly fought many conflicts, Commander. Your experience in warfare must be extensive. Indeed, Zexahai replied, his chest swelling with pride. I have led armies across 17 different wars. Would you like to hear about some of my greatest battles? The three humans agreed, so Zexahai began telling his favorite war stories. He spoke of the siege at Vorthak Prime, where his forces held a mountain pass for 6 months against an enemy army twice their size. The conditions had been terrible. Food ran out after the first month, and his soldiers survived by eating the bodies of fallen enemies and drinking melted snow. We were completely surrounded, Zexahai explained, his eyes glowing with the memory. The enemy attacked us every day for 26 weeks. My warriors fought with broken weapons and empty stomachs. Many died from cold and hunger, but we never retreated. When relief forces finally arrived, only 200 of my original 1,000 soldiers remained alive. Torres leaned forward with interest. That sounds like an incredibly difficult situation, Commander. Your soldiers must have been very brave to endure such hardship. They were the finest warriors in the Krillian military, Zexahai said proudly. Only the strongest and most disciplined soldiers could survive such a trial. Morrison took a sip of water before speaking. Your story reminds me of something my grandfather told me about his service in World War II. He fought in a battle called Stalingrad during the winter of 1942. Zexahai's four eyes focused on the human captain. Tell me about this battle. The German army surrounded the city, Morrison began quietly. My grandfather, Pete Morrison, was trapped there with hundreds of thousands of other soldiers and civilians. The siege lasted for 5 months during one of the coldest winters on record. The alien commander listened carefully. 5 months was similar to his own experience at Vorthak Prime. But Morrison continued with details that made Zexahai's victory seem less impressive. They had no food except what they could find in the ruins, Morrison said. My grandfather told me they ate rats, boiled leather from their boots, and sometimes cooked wallpaper paste to fill their stomachs. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero, but they had no fuel for heating. Collins added more information. The soldiers lived in bombed buildings and underground tunnels. Enemy artillery fired on them constantly. Many froze to death in their sleep. Zexahai felt confused. These conditions sounded worse than what his elite warriors had endured. Yet Morrison spoke about his grandfather as if the man had been an ordinary soldier, not a specially trained warrior. How many of your people were trapped in this city? Zexahai asked. Over 1 million, Torres answered. Soldiers and civilians together. The alien commander nearly choked on his drink. 1 million beings trapped in a single battle. His entire siege at Vorthak Prime had involved only 20,000 troops on both sides combined. What happened to them? Zexahai managed to ask. Most survived, Morrison said simply. They held the city until relief forces broke through the enemy lines. My grandfather lived through the whole siege and continued fighting for 2 more years after that. Zexahai stared at the human in disbelief. His own soldiers were genetically enhanced warriors, trained from birth for combat and hardship. They had military conditioning that allowed them to endure pain and suffering better than normal Krillians. Yet these humans, apparently ordinary civilians and soldiers, had survived conditions that seemed even worse than Vorthak Prime. Your grandfather was a professional soldier? Zexahai asked. Morrison shook his head. Before the war, he worked in a factory making automobiles. The military trained him for only a few months before sending him to fight. This information stunned the alien commander completely. His warriors trained for decades before being considered ready for serious combat. The idea that someone could go from factory work to surviving a 5-month siege with only months of preparation seemed impossible. Collins began sharing her own family history. My great-grandmother, Rose Martinez, worked in aircraft factories during the war. She built fighter planes for 4 years, working 12 hours every day, 7 days a week. That sounds like important work, Zexahai said, trying to understand. She must have been a skilled engineer or technician. She was a housewife before the war started, Collins replied. She had never worked in a factory before. The government taught her and millions of other women how to build airplanes, tanks, and weapons. They learned quickly because their country needed them. Zexai felt his understanding of warfare beginning to shift. Among Krillians, military production was handled by specialized castes who spent their entire lives learning their trades. The concept of converting ordinary civilians into weapons manufacturers within months challenged everything he thought he knew about military logistics. Torres spoke about his own family history. My great-uncle Carlos Torres survived something called the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. He was captured when the Japanese army overran his position. What happened to prisoners of war in your conflicts? Zexai asked, though he suspected he might not like the answer. The enemy forced captured soldiers to march across the jungle for 6 days without food or water, Torres explained. They had to walk over 60 miles in extreme heat. Anyone who fell down or tried to rest was killed immediately. Thousands died during the march. The alien commander felt sick. Krillian warfare followed strict codes about treatment of prisoners. Captured enemies were held in comfortable conditions and often released after conflicts ended. The idea of forcing wounded prisoners to march until they died seemed barbarically cruel. Your great-uncle survived this march? Zexai asked quietly. Yes, and 3 years in prison camps after that, Torres said. He never talked much about what happened, but he lived through it all and came home when the war ended. Morrison added more details about human endurance. Millions of ordinary people became soldiers, factory workers, nurses, and pilots during the war. A neighbor of my grandfather, Helen Burke, worked 19-hour shifts in a steel mill while her son Danny fought battles across the Pacific Ocean. 19 hours every day? Zexai asked, amazed. For 3 years, Morrison confirmed. She helped produce the metal needed for ships and tanks. Meanwhile, her son was fighting in jungle, battles thousands of miles away. Neither of them had any military training before the war started. Collins told another story about a pilot named Chris Allen, who flew 50 bombing missions over enemy territory. He watched friends die in burning aircraft, but he kept flying until the war ended. Most pilots were just regular young men who learned to fly military planes in a few months. Zexai realized that his conception of these humans as weak and inexperienced was completely wrong. They spoke casually about ordinary people enduring hardships that would break his best-trained warriors. More disturbing was the scale of their conflicts. His proudest battles involved thousands of soldiers, but these humans spoke of millions of participants as if such numbers were normal. How many people from your planet participated in World War II? He asked, dreading the answer. Over 100 million served in military forces, Morrison replied. But the entire population was involved in some way. Everyone contributed to the war effort. Zexai sat in stunned silence. His entire species numbered only 3 billion across 12 different worlds. The idea that a single planet could mobilize 100 million soldiers while maintaining production and civilian support seemed beyond belief. These soft-looking humans were starting to seem much more dangerous than he had initially thought. On the third day, Commander Zexai requested access to human historical records. He needed to understand exactly what these small beings had endured on their home world. Captain Morrison agreed to share detailed information about human wars and conflicts. Zexai sat alone in his command center, reviewing the data files that the humans had provided. What he discovered made his forehands shake as he read through the documents. The scale of human warfare was beyond anything he had imagined possible. World War II had not been fought between two small armies on a distant battlefield. The conflict had covered the entire planet. 73 nations had participated directly in the fighting. The war had lasted for 6 full years, with battles happening simultaneously on every continent except Antarctica. The alien commander pulled up a map showing the scope of the conflict. Red areas marked active battle zones. Nearly half of the planet's surface was colored red. Humans had been fighting each other across vast oceans, frozen mountains, burning deserts, and dense jungles all at the same time. The numbers were staggering. Over 70 million people had died during World War II alone. Zexai calculated that this represented more deaths than his entire species had suffered in their complete recorded history. His people had fought wars for over 2,000 years, but their total casualties across all conflicts were less than what humans had lost in a single 6-year period. But World War II was not the only conflict humans had fought. The records showed dozens of other major wars throughout their history. World War I had killed 20 million people just 20 years before World War II began. The American Civil War had killed over 600,000. The Napoleonic Wars had lasted for 12 years and killed millions more. HFY began to understand that warfare was not unusual for humans. It was a constant part of their development as a species. They had been fighting large-scale conflicts for thousands of years, each generation learning from the previous one's battles. The Battle of Gettysburg caught his attention because of its primitive nature. Human soldiers had fought for 3 days using simple gunpowder weapons. They stood in open fields firing single shots before reloading manually. Over 50,000 soldiers had been killed or wounded in just 3 days of fighting. This confused HFY greatly. His people used energy weapons that could kill dozens of enemies with each shot. They had personal shields, advanced armor, and automated targeting systems. Yet these primitive humans, fighting with basic rifles and cannons, had engaged in battles far more deadly than anything Krillians had ever experienced. The documentation showed that human soldiers at Gettysburg had charged directly into enemy fire, running across open ground while bullets flew around them. They had no energy shields or advanced armor. Many wore simple cloth uniforms that provided no protection against weapons. Yet they continued fighting for 3 straight days until one side finally retreated. HFY found records of individual human soldiers who had performed acts that seemed impossible. A medic named Tony Green had run into active combat zones 37 times during a single battle to rescue wounded soldiers. He had carried injured men to safety while enemy bullets struck the ground around him. Green had no armor, no weapons, and no protection except a small red cross painted on his helmet. The alien commander could not understand this behavior. Medics in Krillian armies worked far behind battle lines, treating soldiers who had been carried to safety by others. The idea of running into active gunfire to save wounded enemies seemed both brave and foolish. More disturbing were the records of civilian involvement in human wars. HFY discovered that humans did not keep their non-military population safe during conflicts. Instead, they involved everyone in the war effort. Factory supervisor Mary Johnson had organized workers to build aircraft at incredible rates. Her team had produced more flying machines in 1 year than Krillian automated factories built in 5 years. They worked with basic tools and manual labor, sleeping only 4 hours each night for 3 straight years. The records showed that human children had participated in wars. Teenagers like Rick Davis had lied about their age to join military forces. Davis had been only 16 years old when he began fighting against experienced adult soldiers. He had used weapons that required manual reloading after every shot, yet survived 2 years of combat before the war ended. Youth groups had collected metal scraps to build weapons. Children had grown food in small gardens to feed soldiers. Students had worked in factories after school, building ammunition and equipment. The entire human population, from young children to elderly adults, had contributed to their war efforts. HFY found this concept completely alien. Krillian society protected children and non-combatants during conflicts. Wars were fought by professional soldiers while civilians continued their normal lives. The idea of involving the entire population in warfare seemed both dangerous and unnecessary, yet the results spoke for themselves. Humans had been able to sustain massive conflicts for years precisely because everyone participated. Their production capabilities during wartime exceeded what most advanced species could achieve during peacetime. The records contained information about resistance movements that puzzled HFY even more. When enemy forces occupied human territories, civilians continued fighting using hidden weapons and secret communications. Teacher Nancy Wright had helped hide refugees and transmitted messages to friendly forces while enemy soldiers controlled her town. When captured, Wright had endured interrogation and torture without revealing important information. She had eventually escaped and continued resistance activities until friendly forces liberated her area. The record showed thousands of similar cases of civilian resistance throughout human history. HFY could not understand why non-military Humans would risk their lives to continue fighting after their professional armies had been defeated. In Krillian culture, civilians surrendered when military forces were overwhelmed. Continued resistance by untrained people seemed pointless and dangerous, but human resistance movements had been remarkably effective. They had disrupted enemy supply lines, rescued captured soldiers, and provided intelligence information to friendly forces. In many cases, civilian resistance had helped turn the tide of larger battles. The alien commander discovered records of systematic genocide attempts that made him feel physically sick. Some human groups had tried to completely eliminate other human populations during wars. They had built special camps designed to kill millions of people efficiently. Yet humans had survived even these extreme attempts at destruction. Dr. Sam Phillips had performed surgery in hidden underground bunkers while bombs exploded overhead. He had saved hundreds of lives using basic medical tools and improvised equipment. When discovery seemed certain, other humans had helped him escape to continue his work elsewhere. The documentation showed that humans had not only survived genocide attempts, but had emerged from wars stronger and more united than before. They had rebuilt, destroyed cities, established new governments, and created international organizations to prevent future conflicts. HFY spent hours reviewing battle reports and casualty figures. The numbers were so large that he had difficulty accepting them as real. The Battle of the Somme had lasted for 4 months and killed over 1 million soldiers. The siege of Leningrad had trapped 2.5 million people in a city for nearly 3 years. These were not isolated incidents of unusual courage. They represented normal examples of human warfare. Every major conflict in human history had involved millions of participants and lasted for years. Humans had developed the ability to sustain large-scale warfare as a routine part of their civilization. Most shocking of all was the realization that World War II had ended only 20 years ago. Humans had recovered from losing 70 million people, rebuilt their destroyed cities, developed space travel technology, and begun exploring other star systems in just 2 decades. HFY's own species required centuries to recover from major conflicts. The loss of even a few thousand soldiers was considered a significant tragedy that affected Krillian society for generations. Yet humans had absorbed casualties in the millions and continued functioning as if such losses were acceptable costs of survival. As he reviewed the final documents, Commander HFY began to understand that he had been completely wrong about human capabilities. These small, soft-looking beings came from a world where extreme violence and massive casualties were normal parts of life. They had developed survival skills and resilience that far exceeded anything his genetically enhanced warriors possessed. For the first time in his long military career, HFY felt genuinely afraid of another species. Commander HFY could not sleep after reading the human war records. He walked through the corridors of his ship, thinking about everything he had learned. The numbers and stories kept running through his mind. 70 million dead in one war, children fighting alongside adults. Entire populations working together to survive impossible situations. He found Captain Morrison in the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars through the large window. The human seemed peaceful and calm, nothing like someone whose species had endured such terrible conflicts. "Captain Morrison," HFY said quietly as he approached, "I have been reviewing your historical records. I must ask you about something that troubles me greatly." Morrison turned to face the alien commander. "Of course, Commander. What would you like to know?" "Your people fought something called total war," HFY began carefully. "This concept is difficult for me to understand. You involved everyone in your conflicts, not just soldiers." The human nodded slowly. "That's correct. During World War II, entire nations were committed to the war effort. Everyone contributed in some way." HFY's 4 arms moved restlessly as he struggled to find the right words. But why? Why risk your civilians and children? Why not keep them safe while your armies fought? Morrison was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because we couldn't win any other way. Our enemies were too strong and too determined. We had to use every resource available or we would have been destroyed completely." Tell me more about how your civilians participated, Zexai requested. I need to understand this. Morrison began explaining how human society had transformed during wartime. Factory supervisor Mary Johnson organized her workers to build aircraft 24 hours a day. They worked in 3 shifts so production never stopped. Mary herself worked 19 hours daily, sleeping on a cot in her office. The alien commander listened with growing amazement. For how long did she maintain this schedule? 3 years, Morrison answered. Her factory produced over 2,000 aircraft during that time. Most of her workers were women who had never built anything more complicated than household items before the war started. Zexai found this information incredible. His people used automated systems and specialized engineers to build military equipment. The idea that untrained civilians could produce advanced machinery while working such extreme hours seemed impossible. What happened to these workers after the war? Zexai asked. They went back to their normal lives, Morrison said, simply. Mary Johnson returned to being a housewife. Many of the women went back to taking care of their families. They had done what was necessary during the emergency, then resumed their peaceful lives. This amazed Zexai even more. These humans had transformed themselves into industrial workers during crisis, achieved incredible production levels, then calmly returned to civilian life when the danger passed. The mental flexibility required for such changes was beyond anything he had seen in other species. Morrison continued with more examples. Children collected scrap metal for recycling into weapons. They gathered aluminum pots and pans from their homes. Students worked in factories after school, building ammunition and equipment. Even elderly people contributed by growing vegetables and knitting clothes for soldiers. Your entire population became part of your military effort, Zexai observed. Yes, because everyone understood that defeat meant the end of our way of life, Morrison explained. We had seen what happened to conquered peoples. Surrender was not an option we could accept. Zexai thought about this concept. Krillian wars were fought by professional armies with limited objectives. Losing a battle meant paying tribute or giving up territory, but life for most citizens continued normally. Humans apparently faced conflicts where total defeat meant complete destruction of their civilization. Tell me about your resistance movements, Zexai said. I read records of civilians who continued fighting after their armies were defeated. This behavior puzzles me. Morrison's expression grew more serious. When enemy forces occupied our territories, many people refused to accept defeat. They formed secret groups to continue the fight using whatever methods they could. Like teacher Nancy Wright, Zexai said, remembering the records he had read. Yes, Nancy and thousands like her risked their lives to save others and gather intelligence. They had no military training, but they understood that freedom was worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed hopeless. The alien commander struggled to understand this mindset. But she was captured and tortured. Why did she not reveal information to end her suffering? Morrison looked directly into Zexai's 4 eyes. Because the information would have led to the deaths of innocent people she was trying to protect. Nancy valued their lives more than her own comfort or safety. This concept of personal sacrifice for strangers was completely foreign to Zexai. Krillian society was organized around loyalty to immediate family and military unit. The idea of enduring torture to protect people you barely knew seemed almost insane. How many humans behaved this way during your wars? Zexai asked. Millions, Morrison answered without hesitation. Resistance movements operated in every occupied territory. People from all backgrounds participated. Teachers, farmers, shopkeepers, students, grandparents. They had one thing in common. They refused to give up. Zexai began to realize that human warfare was fundamentally different from anything he had experienced. Krillian conflicts involved professional soldiers fighting for specific military objectives. Human wars were struggles for survival, involving entire populations, fighting with desperate determination. I must ask about something else that troubles me, Zexai said quietly. Your records mention systematic attempts to eliminate entire human populations. How did your species survive such extreme cruelty? Morrison's face grew sad as he answered. Those were dark times in our history. Some groups tried to completely destroy others through organized murder. Millions of innocent people died in concentration camps and killing operations. Yet you survived and grew stronger, HFY observed. Because people like Dr. Sam Phillips refused to give up, Morrison explained. Sam performed surgery in hidden bunkers while bombs fell around him. He saved hundreds of lives using basic medical tools and whatever supplies he could find. When one hiding place became too dangerous, other people helped him move to a new location. The alien commander tried to imagine working under such conditions. Krillian medical facilities were protected by strong defenses and located far from combat zones. The idea of performing complex surgery while under active bombardment seemed impossible. How did Dr. Phillips maintain his skills without proper training facilities or equipment? HFY asked. He improvised, Morrison said. Sam used kitchen knives as surgical instruments. He sterilized tools with whatever alcohol he could find. He performed operations by candlelight when electric power was cut off. He learned to work with whatever resources were available. This adaptability impressed HFY greatly. His people were trained to operate specific equipment in controlled environments. When conditions changed or equipment failed, Krillian soldiers often became much less effective. These humans seemed able to maintain their capabilities regardless of circumstances. Morrison shared more stories of human adaptability during extreme conditions. Mechanic Lou Stevens had continued repairing vehicles after losing both legs to enemy bombing. He had developed new techniques for working from a wheelchair, becoming even more skilled than before his injury. Pilot Chris Allen had continued flying combat missions after watching his best friends die in burning aircraft. He had completed 50 dangerous flights over enemy territory, knowing that each mission might be his last. When the war ended, Chris had returned to civilian life and become a commercial airline pilot. These people experienced terrible trauma, Morrison explained. But they used their experiences to help others and build better lives. Lou spent 40 years teaching young people about mechanics and responsibility. Chris trained airline pilots and made civilian air travel safer. HFY realized that humans did not just survive extreme hardship, they transformed their suffering into strength that benefited their entire species. This was completely different from how his people handled trauma and loss. Your species learns from pain rather than being weakened by it, HFY observed. We try to, Morrison said simply. We believe that surviving difficult experiences teaches us lessons that can help prevent future suffering. As the conversation continued, Commander HFY began to understand that human strength came not from superior technology or genetic advantages, but from an unusual ability to adapt, sacrifice, and learn from the worst possible circumstances. On the final day of negotiations, Commander HFY sat alone with Captain Morrison in the quiet observation deck. Through the large window, Earth appeared as a small blue dot against the black of space. The planet looked peaceful and beautiful, showing no signs of the terrible wars that had shaped its people. HFY had spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about everything he had learned. The stories of human courage and suffering had changed his understanding of warfare completely. He looked at the calm human captain sitting beside him and tried to imagine the incredible history that had created such people. Captain Morrison, HFY said quietly, I must tell you something. Before meeting your people, I believed that my species were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. We have fought 17 major wars and conquered many worlds. Our soldiers are genetically enhanced and trained from childhood for combat. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression peaceful and patient. But now I understand that we know nothing about real war, HFY continued. Your people have endured conflicts that make our greatest battles seem like small disagreements between children. The alien commander paused, choosing his words carefully. What I do not understand is why your species fought such terrible wars. You seem like reasonable, peaceful beings. What drove you to such extreme violence? Morrison thought for a long moment before answering. We didn't fight because we enjoyed violence, Commander. We fought because we refused to surrender the things we loved most. What things? HFY asked. Freedom, Morrison said simply. The right to live our lives as we chose. the safety of our families and communities, the chance for our children to grow up in a better world than we inherited. The human captain looked out at the stars as he continued speaking. Every war story you heard was about people protecting something precious to them. My grandfather, Pete, didn't fight in Stalingrad because he wanted to kill enemies. He fought because he wanted his family to remain free. HFY considered this explanation. But surely, there were easier ways to resolve your conflicts. Negotiation, compromise, tribute payments. Morrison shook his head slowly. Our enemies in World War II wanted complete control over other peoples. They built camps designed to murder millions of innocent civilians. They planned to enslave entire populations. There was no compromise possible with such goals. So you fought total war because partial war was not enough, HFY said, beginning to understand. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. When survival itself is threatened, ordinary people become capable of extraordinary things. Teacher Nancy Wright endured torture rather than betray refugees because she understood that their lives depended on her silence. The alien commander felt something shifting in his understanding of courage. Your people did not fight because they were naturally brave. They fought because they had no other choice. That's right, Morrison agreed. Mechanic Lou Stevens didn't volunteer to lose his legs in the war. But when it happened, he chose to use his experience to help others, rather than give up on life. Dr. Sam Phillips didn't want to perform surgery in bombed buildings, but people were dying, and he was the only one who could save them. HFY realized that human strength came from desperation, rather than confidence. These people had faced impossible situations and discovered reserves of courage they never knew they possessed. This was completely different from Krillian warriors, who were bred and trained to be strong from birth. Tell me about your neighbor, HFY requested. The mechanic you mentioned earlier. Morrison smiled slightly. Lou Stevens was drafted into the Army when he was 19 years old. Before the war, he had worked in his father's garage, fixing automobiles for local customers. He was a quiet young man who enjoyed working with his hands and spending time with his girlfriend. The human captain continued the story. Lou was sent to fight in Vietnam, another war we fought years later. His unit was attacked by enemy forces using hidden explosives. The blast destroyed both of his legs and killed several of his friends. HFY winced at the description. Losing limbs in battle was considered a tragedy that ended a warrior's useful life among his people. After Lou recovered from his injuries, he returned home and married his girlfriend, Morrison continued. He couldn't work as a mechanic in the same way as before, but he adapted his techniques to work from a wheelchair. Eventually, he became better at diagnosing engine problems than he had been before his injury. How is that possible? HFY asked, genuinely puzzled. Because he had to listen more carefully to engine sounds and observe symptoms more closely, Morrison explained. Lou couldn't easily crawl under vehicles anymore, so he developed new ways to understand mechanical problems. His disability forced him to become more skilled, not less. This concept amazed the alien commander. Krillian soldiers who suffered serious injuries were retired from active service and given comfortable but meaningless positions. The idea that disability could lead to greater ability challenged everything he believed about strength and weakness. 40 years after the war, Lou taught young people about engines and responsibility. Morrison continued. He never spoke about his military service or complained about his injuries. He just focused on helping others learn useful skills. HFY felt deep respect for this human he had never met. Lou Stevens sounds like a remarkable individual. That's the thing, Commander, Morrison said with a slight smile. Lou wasn't remarkable at all. He was completely ordinary. There are millions of people like him throughout human history. Normal individuals who faced terrible circumstances and chose to keep building rather than give up. The alien commander stared out at Earth, trying to process this information. You are telling me that such courage and resilience are common among your people? Very common, Morrison confirmed. Most humans never think of themselves as particularly brave or strong. They just do what seems necessary when faced with difficult situations. HFY thought about his own warriors who trained constantly to develop courage and fighting skills. My soldiers practice for decades to prepare for war. How do your people develop such strength without special training? Morrison considered the question carefully. I think it comes from caring about something more than ourselves. When Pete Morrison was starving in Stalingrad, he kept fighting because he wanted to protect his family back home. When Nancy Wright was being tortured, she stayed silent because she cared more about the refugees she was hiding than her own pain. Your people become strong through love rather than training, Zexhai observed. Love, duty, loyalty to our communities, Morrison agreed. When something we care about is threatened, we discover capabilities we never knew we had. The alien commander realized that this explained why human warfare was so different from Krillian conflicts. His people fought for territory, resources, and military glory. Humans fought for survival of everything they valued most deeply. This is why your resistance movements were so effective, Zexhai said. Civilians fought as hard as professional soldiers because they were protecting their homes and families. Exactly, Morrison said. A shopkeeper defending his neighborhood could be just as dangerous as a trained warrior because he had more personal reasons to fight. As their conversation continued, Zexhai began to understand the true source of human strength. These beings did not possess superior technology or genetic advantages. Instead, they had developed an unusual ability to transform ordinary people into heroes when circumstances demanded it. The negotiations concluded with humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Council. As Captain Morrison and his officers prepared to return to their ship, Zexhai pulled the human captain aside for a private word. Captain Morrison, he said quietly, I want you to know that meeting your people has changed my understanding of warfare completely. Your species has survived experiences that would destroy most civilizations. You have my deepest respect. Morrison nodded gratefully. Thank you, Commander. We hope that sharing our history helps prevent future conflicts throughout the galaxy. As the human delegation departed, Zexhai made a personal note in his private log. He wrote that he hoped never to face humans as enemies in battle. Any species capable of such determination and sacrifice would prove utterly unconquerable. Looking back at the small blue planet through his window, Commander Zexhai wondered what other incredible truths lay hidden among the stars, and what these remarkable humans might accomplish when their full potential was unleashed throughout the galaxy.